Francisco Zine Fest Cyberfest. Tonight we have the guest of honor, Tanna Tucker, with a question and answer session. Welcome, Tana.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So first, we're gonna quickly go over the order of events, just how everything is gonna run. So I'll introduce our organization. I'll go over our house rules and expectations. I'll introduce myself, and then I'll introduce you, Tana, and you can share some of your work. And then we'll have a few questions from myself, and then hopefully we'll have a few questions from our viewers and guests. Um, San Francisco Zine Fest was founded in 2001 as a gathering place for writers and artists from around the world, but especially the Bay Area. Typically held as a one-day event at the County Fair building in the Golden Gate Park, our 2019 festival had about 240 exhibitors and over 5,000 attendees. Due to COVID-19, however, our 2020 festival is going 100% virtual. And what is Cyberfest? Well, typically we would have one guest of honor because our Scene Fest is one day event. So we'd have one guest of honor this year. Because of COVID, we can do it for 3 weeks. We have three guests of honor. So the first week was Alex L. Combs. Second week was Death P. Sun. And this week is starting off with Tanna Tucker. And so we also want to be careful and safe. So I'm going to go over the Safer Spaces policy. We are committed to providing a harassment-free experience for everyone, regardless of gender, gender identity, expression, sexual orientation, disability, physical appearance, body size, race, or religion. We will not tolerate harassment at San Francisco Zine Fest events in any form. Individuals violating the Safer Space policy may be sanctioned or expelled from the space or the event at the discretion of any San Francisco Zine Fest organizer. Respect people's opinions, beliefs, different states of being, and their point of view. Always get explicit verbal consent before taking someone's photo or crossing other personal boundaries. Be responsible for your actions and aware that they may have an effect on others regardless of your original intent. A safe and respectful community is everyone's responsibility. And just a little bit of what is going to happen tonight. Typically would ask for the videos to be off for everyone. Not so much this time as I'm just one-on-one questioning with Tana. Keep yourself on mute unless you're presenting. If you have a question, ask it in the chat. That also goes for those viewing live on YouTube or Facebook. If you have questions, feel free to ask. Our chat have moderators to assist you. ASL interpretation is provided by ProBonoASL. If you're in Zoom, you can pin the ASL interpreter. Be mindful for folks who are blind or visually impaired, and I'm really talking to myself or to Tana, so that we'll describe everything, be very descriptive when we're sharing our work. And the Zoom session is being recorded and broadcast to Facebook and to YouTube, but above all, please be respectful. Hi, my name is Avy Jetter. I write a zombie comic book called Nothing Good Ever Happens at 4 a.m. I'm a huge horror movie and gore fan. I love even B movies. I love anything sci-fi or weird, to lowbrow, slasher. I also write about my personal health. I write about microaggressions and racial bias and how not to be triggered or how to navigate your workplace and school and deal with self-care, those kind of things. And so I'm gonna welcome Tana Tucker by introducing her. Tana is actually someone that I met a couple years ago. And she is like super like a bright star and always smiling, always encouraging. I'm super grateful she's here with us. There's just not enough great things that I can say about her. Her work is inspiring. But in any case, I'm gonna say a little bit in her words. Often employing an Afrofuturist framework, Tana uses comics and drawing as a way to map her relationship to the Black diaspora and to interrogate the utility of Black presence or absence in historical and mythical spaces. She is currently illustrating the Afro-futuristic graphic novel Black Cube, written by Tasha Womack, Abrams Comics Arts Megascope 2022. Her work has been featured in Lab Magazine, The Nib, and in various anthologies, including Black Comics Returns and Cosmic Underground, a grimoire of Black speculative content. She recently concluded a political power fellowship at the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. So I really want to hand it over to you, Tana, to share a little bit of your work and talk a little bit more about yourself. So take it away, Tana.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Avy. You know, as Avy said, my name is Tanna, and I'm a local cartoonist and writer. I'm working on a graphic novel called Black Cube. I was hoping to show you some of the work that I've done on that so far today, but I'm not quite allowed to show it yet, which is okay. Plenty of other things to discuss. But before we get into it, I just want to say a huge, huge thank you to Avy and to all of the San Francisco Zine Fest organizers for their tremendous work in putting this festival on. It's a lot of work in a normal year, but especially this year, it was a huge daunting task, and I'm just really appreciative of them for this. And I'm really thankful to be one of your special guests. And I also just want to say congratulations to Avy and all of the contributors of the Drawing Power Anthology. For those who don't know, they just received an Eisner Award, which is a huge award in comics. So congratulations to you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. Okay. And hopefully, can you guys just see my screen? It should just be the image. Okay, looks like you can see. Okay. So I'll just start with my poster. Hang on one second. Okay. So yeah, I thought I would start with the poster and just, you know, for the sake of the talk and kind of talking through artist process, speak a little bit about how I designed this poster. The theme, the loose theme for the festival was overcoming barriers. And so I decided to kind of also make this an homage to Drexia, which for those who don't know, it references this electronic music duo from Detroit operating in the 90s. It's like Afrofuturist Canon 101, and they built this entire mythology based around an underwater civilization built by the descendants of drowned slaves from the Middle Passage. So that was sort of the inspiration fueling this, and just kind of tried to have fun with that concept. And this is actually the black and white value study that I really enjoyed. And then from here, of course, like worked into color. And I thought it would be nice to just kind of show you quick and dirty sort of process image from the really loose, sloppy thumbnail all the way through to the color keys. And you'll see it started pretty limited in a palette and then worked on to that teal and pink. But I always enjoy kind of seeing people's starting thumbnail and layout sketches, so you get an idea of their process. So that's the poster. We're gonna go back to 2014 San Francisco Zine Fest, Baby Tanna's first festival, first time vending, which is why, you know, being honored as a special guest this year is really meaningful to me. It's really full circle for me because 2014 is when I was sort of introduced to this community. It also marked the year that I came back to my art practice. So prior to this, I actually took a couple years away from art making beyond just kind of leisurely doodling. I was at this point where I really wasn't sure where my art lived, where I belonged in terms of community and creative practice. And my friend in that photo is Kristen Furch, another lovely cartoonist. We just decided to try vending. I always loved attending. I love, of course, reading comics and zines, but had never vended. And as you can see, I mean, I had a really, small stash there, mostly prints. I had one small mini comic, and it was life-changing. And I really just had a moment of realizing, like, oh, the way that I want to engage with aesthetics and my ethics and my politics and the way I want to weave those things together my way can actually be accommodated in this space. And so until I kind of was reintroduced to comics and zine making as a maker, not just somebody enjoying it, I really didn't know where my work belongs. So it's a huge deal. And I just kind of wanted to start there and acknowledge that. And some of the folks that I met that day are like family now. Okay, so we'll talk about some work. And for this talk, I'm going to just mostly be talking about process. It's going to be an overview. I'll be saving reading comics for Thursday's event. So I'll just kind of be going through a few different pieces. And I feel like, I kind of have these three major threads of inquiry, which is sort of like mapping in a more journalistic, historical explainer way, obscure leftist history. And, I would say more of just like the kind of dreamy Afrofuturist thread. And then I'm also, I have this whole other project going on with Westerns. But to me, all these things, they do relate, and they're actually, they can't be disentangled. So I'm just going to go through a few pieces that kind of represent those various threads of thought. So Black and Red, this is a piece we did for the NIB. I collaborated with Nestor Castillo, who's a local historian and teacher at San Francisco State. So we worked on this together, and we mapped out the points of history that we wanted to hit together, and then he crafted the script and I drew it. And so, yeah, it's a pretty, it's a short piece. So it's a pretty fast, like quick and dirty overview of sort of like Black leftists and Marxists in the United States. And we start with 1917, and we're sort of relating the relationship of, Black radicals and Marxists and activists in the United States, World War I into the 20s and 30s with what was going on in sort of like the burgeoning nascent Soviet Russia, and also the communication relationship politically, between leftist activists and these anti-racist efforts happening within and outside of the United States. And you can read this entire comic for free on the NIB. And we touch on the Great Migration, that shift of the Black proletariat moving to the North between 1914 and 1920. And then we go all the way up to the Black Panthers and the various incarnations of Red Scare. So yeah, and I really enjoy sort of normalizing, like one of my goals for my work is to sort of normalize these obscure, what feels like obscure moments of leftist history, and particularly how Black and brown folks fit into that, and sort of normalize it by visually constructing it for myself in a medium of comics and illustration. So I love Westerns, and before I show some images, I just thought I would show like, a mini mood board. I love making mood boards. So grew up with Westerns on in the house all the time. So, it sort of just has this sensory nostalgia for me, this nostalgic quality. And then when I came back to Westerns as an adult, I really connected and resonated with the kind of inherent anti-capitalist sentiment in the Italian Westerns. the critique that was happening in Italian or spaghetti Westerns, Once Upon a Time in the West in particular. And, you know, I really just started digging deep into researching the role of Black folk in Western expansion, Black cowboys, thinking a lot about, you know, Black folk in not just like the recorded, you know, actual history, but also, you know, this mythology, and wanting to sort of subvert and interrogate this mythological American West, which is so, of course, like masculine and Eurocentric in a way that was really harmful. And this is a wonderful text that, you know, I've used in my research that I recommend if you're interested. And that top piece is just the, it's from title credits to A Fistful of Dollars, which is a Sergio Leone Western. And I have that here because this was sort of a test image. It started as just a test image, this We Can Fight banner, and wanting to kind of experiment with making a title credit similar to this and that Western theme. And I modeled the font after the font that appears in the title credits. And you can actually like just watch the credits on YouTube if you don't know what I'm talking about. They're very memorable. I love it. Here are some test pages. You know, I'm working on this massive project with Yatasha, but you know, the Western imagery and storytelling is always there for me. So I haven't really shown these anywhere. But this is just me kind of loosely experimenting with like a personified version of death in a Western genre trope and setting. It's funny because anybody who knows me knows that I am actually way too sensitive for like any kind of horror subject matter, but I'm realizing I actually have like a lot of horror themes and ghosts in my work. This is another mood piece inspired by, you know, reading about and researching the Maroon communities that Black and some Indigenous folk built together. And moving more into kind of Afrofuturist imagery. And also I like to do work for bands and shows. So I got to collaborate with Michaela. She's an Ethio jazz musician. And I made this poster for her. And so we kind of leaned in, as you can see, into like Art Nouveau motifs. And this was this was a promotional image to go with the release of her track Supernova. And this was actually, these are more images that were a result of collaborating also with Michaela on this multimedia project. This is several years old actually, but I wanted to include it because it kind of shows, you know, where I started and a legacy of, you know, where I'm working from. And you wouldn't know it from these first few images I've shown you, but I actually tend to favor more muted, limited palettes. But these are like really loud, kind of hot neon palettes. So yeah, just a short comic strip. And then I kind of made this companion cover image for her and I modeled it after her and we had a lot of fun conversations about it. Okay, so moving on to just speaking a little bit about where I am with sort of Afrofuturist frameworks and canon and how I'm sort of engaging with that. I tried to resist not putting in too much theory and images of just influence because that could turn into a whole other just like academic lecture about Afrofuturist canon. But I do want to include a few things here to just show you where my mind is at and where I'm, you know, sort of my entry points into this. So I like to include this slide before getting into the next few images because it really captures, it really captures how I'm thinking about this and relating to it. I revisited Spaces the Place, Sun Ra's film a few years ago. And this passage in particular really captured me and made me pause and ignited something. And he says, "I do not come to you as the reality, I come to you as the myth, because that's what Black people are, myths." And of course, thinking about Octavia Butler is so formative for so many of us. But, you know, this is the first time I encountered some kind of time travel story that actually acknowledged what you'd have to reconcile as a Black person traveling through time, and everything that comes with that. And of course, you know, part of what makes, you know, Saint Octavia Butler's work so powerful is that she is a very fervent student of history, and that informs her fiction and her science fiction, which is why her work feels so prescient, right? And we can talk more about that later. And then I've included just a few images of John Aconfra, who's like a huge touchstone for me, with the way that, you know, I feel like he is Afrofuturist. I mean, he made an actual like academic video essay in 1996 called The Last Angel of History, which asserts blues as a Black technology. And there's this narrator, this character, this fictional character called the Data Thief, who is traveling through time using that technology to excavate and archive Blackness and Black experience. And then I included these images of Vertigo C, which is from an installation he did. It's this film triptych, sort of documenting all the wonder and terror and violence that the ocean and that the sea witnesses and holds. And this figure here that is, you know, continues to appear throughout in this kind of dreamy narrator way, is Alauda Equiano, who is a Black sailor and responsible for one of the earliest slave narratives, which takes us to the newest piece that I'm working on called Haunted Sea Visitation, which is a baptism myth. It's what I'm calling a baptism myth. And it's also inspired by, you know, just research and a lot of meditating on West and Central African conceptions of time, which isn't linear. You know, reflecting on and meditating on river cults and water rituals. And I'll be reading, it's a longer piece and I'll be reading a section of it on Thursday. But as you can see, yeah, I'm coming back to that kind of limited soft palette. I'm experimenting with handwriting for the lettering. So it's not legible at this size, but hopefully you get an idea of the mood. And then I just wanted to touch on this piece. This was originally published in Lab Magazine. It's an independent newspaper that examines, it's quite radical, it examines race and representation, among other things, through the lens of cartooning. And each issue has a theme. So the 2019 theme was death and hauntology. And I did a one-shot comic, and this was, you know, my best effort at a ghost story. And it's called The Plains of Nicodemus. You can read it in Lab, and I'll also be reading this on Thursday in full. But I was experimenting with this idea of slave ships as ruins run aground that appear as part of a kind of a supernatural landscape. And, you know, back to thinking of the speculative as a place to be in dialogue with historical memory and sort of, you know, imbuing these projects, you know, I have with mapping history, mapping insurrectionist moments, mapping moments of interracial solidarity against imperialism. So going back to that research I had been doing on Western expansion and Black soldiers and Black cowboys and Buffalo soldiers. And for those who don't know, Buffalo Soldier refers to the all Black regiments during the Civil War and post-Civil War. And so just reading about that, I stumbled on the Pacific Wars, which I had no idea about. So basically the United States occupied the Philippines right at the turn of the century, and they sent Black regiments at a certain point. And so I wanted to make a speculative piece that was kind of reflecting on the true accounts of Black soldiers defecting to the Filipino resistance. And I kind of I also wanted to take this, take it as a space to create an amalgamation of two figures. David Fagan was probably the most famous one to defect and was really skilled at guerrilla warfare and like rose to the rank of captain with the Filipino insurgents. And he was public enemy number one, right, for like the Americans. So I was thinking about him, and also Cathay Williams, who is the only known account of a woman enlisting as a man in those regiments. She wasn't deployed to the Philippines, but she served in North America. But it's just kind of me like dreaming and fantasizing about what it would have been like if she had been deployed in such a situation, or she was forced to be in such a situation, and sort of crafting a figure based off of that. And in my heart, I'd like to believe that such a figure would defect. And then thinking about what it would have been like to encounter those insurgent fighters. From what I understand, in the Philippines, historically, women have been able to fight while openly presenting as femme if they chose to. So, I'm being very deliberate with how I'm depicting them here. But yeah, very speculative. And this was a short comic strip, just sort of thinking about them too. I've been spending a lot of time with these characters in the past year. I've been coming back to them. The first piece I made, I think, starting around this time last year. And just a short, silent comic strip depicting these two characters and thinking a lot about tenderness. And for me, I wanted to juxtapose these two actions. And I think the tenderness and the intimacy that comes with, braiding someone's hair, doing somebody's hair, shares the same space as the intimacy and trust, that you give someone when you're teaching them self-defense or how to successfully engage in warfare against white supremacist forces. And just one more comic strip of these two. And that's it. And I will end with this image of the data thief for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's amazing.
Thank you.
I do have a few questions, some of which I shared with you. So have you always drawn? I know I started drawing at 3-4 years old. Have you always drawn, and did you have an influence early in your family or a teacher that influenced you or encouraged you to draw?
Yeah, I've also always have drawn. I've always liked writing and drawing stories. And I think I'm fortunate in that everybody really encouraged that kind of creative wandering.
Nice.
Yeah.
I know you mentioned Afro futurism, and I'm familiar with it, but can you explain to people that don't know what Afro futurism is or what it's about or where it comes from?
Yeah, so I think, generally it speaks to this intersection of kind of, the imaginative, the speculative, the historical, science fiction, using imaginative space to sort of offer critique. I think a lot gets thrown under the banner of Afrofuturism, which, for better or worse. And I actually have complicated feelings sometimes about it and how I'm relating to it. So I guess, from there, I would just kind of say that's like a more general, I think, definition of what that framework is. I think it can be the way that I'm sort of engaging with it and the people that I'm sort of looking toward that I think, really influence and kind of are like informing how I'm engaging with it, are quite radical. And I don't view it as an apolitical, purely aesthetic, escapist space. I think it can actually be this like hyper weaponized space for resistance and liberation and like just radical reimagining. and I know I'm really focused on the historical. And I think, maybe it's obvious, but it's worth saying that Afrofuturism is as much about the past as it is the future.
Right.
And so I think like, being able to use speculative space to kind of go back and slow down and reclaim or recontextualize history for ourselves on our own terms, and using that as a way to like build survival in the present, and also push against and subvert really harmful, toxic historical narratives, right? Or the way,
Right.
using it as a way to kind of counter what is left out in in the way that history is told.
I think context is an important word that you said, because you can spotlight certain aspect, right? When we talk about a lot of the slave narrative movies, right, where you can spotlight the abuse and the trauma, like Sean Taylor said earlier, it becomes, trauma porn, right? And
Yeah.
spotlighting the triumphs or overcoming, or spotlight the, in spite of, or the um, the, like I said, the triumphs or the inspiration that you gain, or perspective that we gain from the past to the present. It can be weaponized, as you said, but it can also be just a easy cliche, easy way to uh, describe the Black experience in just a narrow way. And I know that you use a lot of research, and you have a very a great way of incorporating nonfiction elements into the fantasy, into the sort of mystical magic of the Black experience. And so can you talk a little bit about how you decide, because it seems like it happens organically, how you decide how much research or traditional African folklore that you're going to incorporate in your work? How do you
Mm.
come to that place of the amount of research and truth that you present in your work? And how do you come to that place in a practical way? Because I really enjoy that you offer history with the art, but how do you come to that place? How do you decide that?
Oh, thank you for that question. I guess I would say two things. I do a lot of research, and I love spending a lot of time just kind of in that period. And I think it's part of why I'm so slow sometimes. I really like to take my time meditating on things, and also kind of chasing different tangents and threads that pop up. Like I said, the piece about the Buffalo Soldiers in the Pacific Wars, like I didn't anticipate landing there. That really just came by just like voraciously reading everything I could about Black regiments. So I spent a lot of time researching, and then kind of just allow that to fuel and sort of fuel and inspire and motivate maybe what I'm trying to talk about in a more more speculative, fictitious space. And something that I think I've been really working to articulate is this place of I'm speaking from the position of a Black American, who of course I'm you know I'm tied to Black diaspora, but not all experiences of the diaspora are my own. And so
Right.
I'm thinking a lot about how to connect to something that I do kind of feel severed from, as someone who is, um, definitely I can map back to the plantations. I'm a descendant of slaves. Um, there's a lot of missing parts when it comes to finding history. So there's like a distance at the same time, like like I am tied to diaspora, but there is a distance. And so it's this, for me it feels like a complicated sort of conundrum or puzzle of like, how do I kind of heal my relationship around that through the art I'm making, while also not being appropriative. And I think for me, kind of working in the speculative has helped me with that, because I can you know in an honest way sort of work through that without I can kind of invent a little bit based off things that are researched, but I can kind of invent a little bit. And for me, I think that, I don't know if this makes sense, but in doing that, I feel like I can engage with diaspora and all of the history that contains, while also being, just like honest about the fact that not all of it is my experience and that I'm quite distant and severed from part of it. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's something that I think a lot about. Yeah.
It does, because I struggle with that in my own work.
Yeah.
One thing that I noticed too is that you have these repetitive themes that come up. Your work is very melodic, and so it does remind me of music, and it reminds me of jazz or the blues in the way that you use color. Especially, you talked about your limited palette, but I see your palette as a way to sort of pace your work. You might not be cognizant of that, but the pacing color does speak to, or informs the pacing of your work and what we as a viewer should pay attention to. And then one of the other themes I feel like is the ocean or the sea, which of African folklore revolves around like coming from the ocean, and then gods that come from the ocean, and especially Yoruba tradition, and the Yemiya and Orisha that come from the water and imbue the people with the power of water. And is that something that you deliberately have done, or is that just something that is comes up for you, uh, just as it's just something that happened, or are you cognizant of that? And can you talk about music in specific to your work? Is that something you listen to? Is that something that you infects you? Because I hip hop affects me, and so I'm just curious about jazz and blues because you mentioned it before, and also about the African tradition, different religions, and how that affects you, if that's deliberate as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm right there with you. So I mentioned I love making mood boards. So I make at the start of a project and even an illustration, I make like a little visual mood board for myself, but I also make a musical mood board or like a playlist to like kind of just try to induce myself into a certain kind of headspace.
Nice.
I love a lot of jazz and avant-garde jazz. And like for the Haunted Sea piece, which I'm still working on, I've almost exclusively listen to like Alice and John Coltrane.
You can almost hear it. It is so amazing. I love it. It's so obvious. Well, to me, it's obvious, and I'm like, I can hear it. It's almost. Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's just.
No.
I'm so happy to hear that, because I'm like, is she really riffing on, like, it's almost like you're riffing like, Coltrane, or like really beautiful the way that you're doing that with the color and with just the patterns that you create. But I'm gonna let you speak about that.
No, thank you so much. That's a high compliment, because that's that's such a compliment if it feels like you can energetically feel that. Music definitely feels my work. It's like I just feel like it's one way I can get myself into a headspace and in a humble way, kind of be in dialogue with those creative forces. Not putting myself on a same plane as Coltrane, but just like I definitely try to immerse and like meditate on that. And I have periods where I just kind of like binge like podcasts and news and like and lectures as well. But like certain points of the process, it does feel really important to just have silence or really intentional sound and soundscapes. And I think, water is something that has been calling to me a lot in the last year, I would say. There's this concept that I came across, and I might be mispronouncing it because I've never heard it spoken. I've just read it, but it's called the Kalunja line, which in Congolese cosmology dictates water as the boundary between the living and the spirit world. And so I kind of just been responding to that and trying to find as much as possible referencing that. And the Haunted Sea comic kind of gets more into that. And then what I'd say presently is informing me more than thinking about I mean, I'm definitely thinking about Orisha and water deities, of course. But I've also just been thinking about quantum physics and these different conceptions of time and this rejection of linear time and how linear time is linked with violence and capitalism. And I'm bringing, I bring that up because those are like the three main tenets of what is informing, I think, a lot of the work that I'm actively working on right now in writing.
So you talked a little bit about kindred and time travel. Have you read Beloved? I'm sure you read Beloved.
I haven't finished. I actually had a really hard time with it. And I need to return to it.
Because it's a circular narrative.
But yeah.
Wow.
But I know what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. So that is cool. Well, I really want to. I want to talk to you when you finish reading it because it's my favorite. It is hard to read, but it's very poetic. Very. It relies heavily on surrealism, and I feel like your work does that too. But then in a more, I don't want to say intelligent way, but in a more almost in a more approachable way. Your work provides a lot of detailed information that you can enter the pieces that way, but then it's because you do talk about ancestry, or you do talk about the diaspora, and incorporate text not only to inform but as art itself. Can you talk a little bit more about text and graphics as art, or do you prescribe to that? Because I feel like the fonts and the text that you choose in the hand lettering actually becomes part of the underlying piece itself. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Oh yeah, thank you for that. I think, so I'm trained as a painter and an illustrator first, and I still kind of feel like an imposter working sequentially. It does not come naturally to me. And I think the biggest lesson I'm still learning with comics, well, one is what my shorthand is in image making. And two, like what does it mean to compose with text and image? And I feel like the way I do it currently is slow and probably not super efficient. I kind of start with like writing the script almost, I'm considering that it's going to be in a comic and paired with image, but I'm almost just writing it like prose. And then there's this period where I'm like, this is not enough to tell a story. And then I obsess about not having enough text. And then I like have a meltdown. And then I thumbnail. And when I get down to actually composing and thumbnailing and doing layouts, this is why it's so important to do thumbnails. I'm like, actually, I have way too much text because, right, it's a balance of figuring out when you show and not tell. And, where it makes sense to have something in text and image. So then I usually go back. It's just like a back and forth. I thumbnail and then I'm like, oh, I need to subtract like half of this. Otherwise, I'm just going to have like a wall of text and things can't breathe. So I just kind of have this like laborious back and forth. I do thumbnail a little bit when I'm writing, but it feels like too overwhelming. So I don't know. I'm probably making it harder on myself, but I kind of just like presently compartmentalize it where I'm writing and then thumbnailing and I'm like, okay, well, this is going to dictate some editing. And then that, I think I'm pretty ruthless when I edit, but it forces you to like hone in even more, I think. But I don't know. I'm sure like a lot of other cartoonists have a much faster, more efficient method.
Well, mine certainly isn't. I'm the exact opposite. I am more visual, so I will envision everything except for the text, and then do the opposite and be, oops, I need to tell a story here. So
but that's kind of cool. Is that how you're writing? Is that how you're writing Nothing Good at 4 a.m.?
Definitely.
Okay.
I'm so lost in just killing people. To be honest, like, ooh, how can I make this cool way to break an arm off or gouge an eye out, and be so focused on the violence and just giggling the whole way. Ooh, let's find a sick way to kill someone. And then forget, I need to
you're like, oh yeah,
text. But I also have a question too, because you talk about the back and forth that you're doing. How are you doing more digital work now, or is it all traditional? Because you did talk about liking one over the other. I can't remember which, but are you doing the iPad and Procreate more, or are you doing, traditional watercolor? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, right now I find myself just drawing straight into Procreate more and more. I like really savor just drawing on paper. And I used to only do my line work in pencil on paper, and I would take it as far as I could, and then I would scan it in and usually just color it digitally. But lately, I think for the sake of time, I've just been drawing straight into Procreate, and I still make my own textures and scan them in. But yeah, I'm almost sadly 100% digital, but I'd like to get back to more tactile media.
I really want to get to that. Well, not quite 100% digital, but I need to use it more. I won't lie. I just got a Surface Pro 7, and now I have no excuse. I have to start using digital media.
Oh my gosh. Well, let me know how you like it though. I mean, you can definitely like find a hybrid, and we should I don't know, we should co-work sometime and figure
Definitely.
it out.
I want to learn how to put textures in to use my own textures. That would be amazing because I do a lot of cross hatching, so I'd love to learn that.
But I usually end up putting them. That's the thing I haven't quite figured out. The smoothest workflow is like I draw in Procreate, but when I texture and color, I still finish it in Photoshop. So I still end up going into Photoshop. But yeah.
So have politics always been a part of your work? Is that something that, as you evolved, have you, and of course the times we live in kind of force you to talk about politics, but is that something that you have always incorporated into your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think this just like insatiable sort of curiosity and desire to sort of map these moments, particularly like moments of insurrection. It's just always there. It's I think foundational in my work at this point. Even if I'm working in like more like fiction or kind of like dreamy space. Yeah.
I mean, one thing I learned very early on is just being Black and a woman is a political statement in itself if you're drawing yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
That very quickly. So it's kind of like unavoidable, right? I mean, I have had people ask me, at shows, do you draw anything other than African people? And I'm like, huh? Like, you don't think about it as I deliberately make the choice to mostly draw people, but you don't think of it as a deficit or a negative, right? And when someone approaches you in that headspace, it's always just a mind-boggling, like, whoa, it shifts your perspective, right?
Yeah, because they still are like, I want to other this. Like, we're just normalizing it. And it's like a rejection of that, where they're just like, yeah, but this is this other thing. Whenever I see, I've coded the appearance of a minority as like having this very specific kind of political function. That's really frustrating. I know what you mean. I got certain kinds of feedback like that from a very certain, like specific kind of person.
It's a little bizarre, I think, too. Now, I mean, I feel like just we're talking about fantasy, right? I do horror, so you can accept a zombie, but you can't.
Yeah, before a Black protagonist. Yeah, just regular Black
people,
person on the page. Yeah, that's the bizarre part. Yeah.
So I really want to know if you do see art. Maybe give me your idea of where you see your art in 5, maybe 10 years. Is there some goal that you've set that you want to share with us, that where you see your work either in a publication or a particular museum or place, or even a book or novel? Like, what do you see in 5 to 10 years?
Man, wow. I think I feel like I'm really, I think beside myself with gratitude right now that I'm already starting to live in where I want to be. Nice. I'm really excited to be working on this graphic novel. I mean, I guess the next goal is to just write and draw my long form work, which will hopefully be the Western. But I'm just working with a really dreamy collaborator. We're just like so I think connected and in sync with what we want to do and how we want to kind of, you know, I don't know, engage with like Afrofuturism with our work. Um, my hope is to just, I don't know, I guess I'll answer it like this. Like, I mean, this isn't entirely, I guess, responding to the question, but I just really hope that folks, if they read my work or, just become a little more curious about history. I hope my work helps to radicalize folks, like young folks. And just like maybe just a small like push in the direction. I hope it inspires people to look again, look
Awesome.
harder, look again at history, look harder. I just want to keep making. I just want to be able to I just want to be able to sustain myself full time as an artist. That's really it.
I think that's all of our wish and goal. Well, I
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining us, and I mean, you inspire me. You
You
definitely.
inspire me.
So it's really been awesome talking to you. Before we wrap up, are there anything else you'd like to share with us? Maybe your website or social media.
Yeah. I have most of my work on my website. It's just tannatucker.com. And I'm
Yes,
sometimes on Instagram, just at Tana. uh,
sweet. Well, thank you so much, and I just want to do a little bit more of promoting the rest of Cyberfest. So coming up, we do have show and tell Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday from 6 to 7, and thanking captions with you again. We're gonna have your invited guest on Thursday from 6 to 7:30, and then Friday show and tell. And then on our final day, we'll have a drawing and zine making session from 1 to 2, and then log off from 6 to 7 p.m., which will be awesome get together. And I want to show the wonderful poster that you did again, and the sticker that you can get from our store. Um, Also, just want to thank Intersection for the Arts. We are a member of Intersection of the Arts, and want to thank the ASL interpreters for all of their wonderful work tonight. I think we had two interpreters from Pro Bono ASL, and that wraps it up for us tonight. Thank you so much.